down a short list of some of the things that he did. I gave a talk at Washington University once, and a student who likes my books had a T-shirt made out that said "Dictator To-Do List," and had all these things on it. The first thing is the illegal suspension of the writ of habeas corpus on his own. The Constitution allows for the suspension of the writ, but only by Congress. After which Lincoln appointed William Seward in charge of a sort of a KGB-style secret police that rounded up anywhere between 15 and 30,000 northern civilians for merely opposing the Lincoln administration. These are not spies and traitors. There are people like the mayor of Baltimore, Congressman Henry May of Baltimore, 20 members of the Maryland state legislature. And of course, the Constitution requires the federal government to provide for a Republican form of government in the states. And so that was a direct denial of that aspect of the Constitution. There were northern gulags, like Fort Lafayette in New York Harbor, where it was said that the only place there was genuine free speech in the North during the war was in these prisons, because once you're in prison for free speech, what have you got to lose? He closed down, and by the way, if you want to read a book about this, I would recommend a book by James Randall, Constitutional Problems Under Lincoln. Randall taught at the University of Illinois for many years. James McPherson calls him the preeminent Lincoln scholar of the last generation, and all these facts I'm rattling off here are all in this book, among other places. Like I said, he shut down over 300 opposition newspapers, and in some instances the editors and owners were thrown into prison, and in some instances there were mobs of sort of Republican Party activists, let's call them activists, who literally destroyed the printing presses of the opposition press. They didn't destroy every last opposition press, but they sent a pretty strong message. He started a war without congressional approval, confiscated firearms in the border states. In fact, the whole invasion of the South was a violation of the Second Amendment. As James Madison said, the whole purpose of the Second Amendment was to deter a federal army from ever invading a sovereign state. Lincoln micromanaged the waging of war on civilians as well as the Confederate Army for 4 long years. I make this case in my book. I can make it, if we have questions on this later, I can make a longer case, but I'm trying to get through this. James McPherson estimated that about 50,000 Southern civilians were killed by the Union Army, one way or another, during the war. There's one anecdote I'll offer. One day, over 4,000 artillery shells exploded in the city of Charleston, South Carolina, at a time when there was no Confederate Army there. It was civilians and maybe some wounded soldiers, but that was it. It was not a battle. It was just a bombing of a city. And this went on all throughout the South. All telegraph communication was censored. As I said, 20 members of the Maryland legislature were imprisoned. There were 2 confiscation acts that allowed the U.S. government to take the property, private property, of people who were dismissing or criticizing the Lincoln administration, essentially. The most outspoken Democrat in Congress was Congressman Clement Vallandigham from Dayton, Ohio. He made very stirring Jeffersonian-sounding speeches criticizing the suspension of habeas corpus and other things. He left Congress. He was gerrymandered out of Congress, actually, by the Republican Party, and he went back home to Ohio to run for governor. And he was arrested, thrown in prison. In the middle of the night, 67 armed federal soldiers broke into his home. He ended up being deported and spent the rest of the war in Canada. It would be as though President Bush had Hillary Clinton deported to Iran. The problem is, when she gets elected president next year, she'll do the same thing to the Republicans. Roger Taney, the Chief Justice, issued an opinion that the suspension of habeas corpus by the president alone is unconstitutional. Lincoln responded by issuing an arrest warrant for Taney. He gave it to his friend and an employee at the time, Ward Layman. And there are several very good sources on this, not only Layman's book, which is in the archives of the Huntington Library, but the biography of Benjamin Robbins Curtis, who was a Supreme Court Justice who authored the opposing opinion in the Dred Scott case, and who defended Andrew Johnson in his impeachment trial. Well, I'm not going to get into the Dred Scott case. I don't have time. I don't really have time. I don't want to get. Yeah. Okay. not getting part of my honorarium. Only a few more things here to explain why historians have called him a dictator. There was the illegal secession of West Virginia from the rest of Virginia. The Constitution requires Congress and the state legislature to agree on partitioning the state and creating a new state. That didn't happen. Northern elections were rigged with the help of federal soldiers. And so these are among the reasons why generations have referred to Lincoln as a dictator. Now, listen to what Jefferson said about secession. He said if the western part of the country ever seceded from the east, he said those of Western Confederacy will be as much our children and descendants as those of the eastern part. That was in 1804, many, many years after the Declaration of Secession, which is the Declaration of Independence. And contrast that with Lincoln. His first inaugural address, he said if any state secedes, the words he used were invasion and bloodshed. That's it, it's right in there. So he was the anti-Jefferson as far as I'm concerned. In terms of economics, Lincoln was a mercantilist, so he was against economic freedom. He was a protectionist. He was a champion of corporate welfare, a champion of inflationary finance through central banking. He admitted that he spent his entire career as a Whig politician advocating those things. That was essentially the political agenda of Alexander Hamilton. I call him the political son of Alexander Hamilton. He opposed equality under the law. Despite a few fanciful statements that he made about equality, he said this to Stephen Douglas in 1858, I will say then that I am not nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races, end quote. He was a member of the Illinois Colonization Society, which wanted to use state funds to deport the small number of free blacks that were in the state, out of the state, and they did do that to some extent. He also said in another debate with Douglas, quote, the African, he always referred to black people as the Africans, as though they were from another planet. So the African upon his own soil has all the natural rights that instrument, the Declaration of Independence, vouchsafes to all mankind. So, and he said this many times. This was his position. He said, yes, blacks and whites can be equal, but not if blacks are here in America. If they're on their own soil, he said, that's where they can be equal. I think you have to understand that, to understand what Lincoln means when he quotes the Declaration of Independence. He voted against black suffrage in Illinois. He opposed allowing blacks to testify in court in Illinois. He voted against abolishing the slave trade in Washington, D.C. when he was in Congress. He was a strong supporter of the Fugitive Slave Act. And he opposed the extent, one of the reasons he gave for opposing the extension of slavery into the territories was he wanted to save the territories for, in his words, free white people. That was one of the reasons he gave for, it wasn't a moral reason, it was just politics. The people in the new territories wanted it to be all white, and so as a politician, he thought there was a lot of votes there among free soil parties, so that's what he did. Give me a time off. Oh, 1 more minute? Okay. So I think to understand Lincoln's position, yes, he did quote the all men are created equal portion of the Declaration of Independence in the Gettysburg Address, but as the great H.L. Mencken once said, the Gettysburg Address was poetry, not fact. Mencken pointed out that it was the Confederates who were fighting for government by consent. They no longer consented to being ruled by Washington, D.C. It was the Northern Army that was fighting against government by consent, H.L. Mencken said. And as far as the equality part, like I said, Lincoln's position really was that blacks could be equal, but only somewhere else. He even held a meeting of free black men in the White House in 1862 and urged them to lead by example and go to Liberia. And these men wisely said, no, thank you, because Lincoln explained to him that thousands of blacks had gone to Liberia, but most of them had perished. Lincoln told them, but you can rest assured that your descendants, if you procreate once you go there, your descendants will outnumber you. There's 10 of you here. If you procreate once you go to Liberia, there might be hundreds of thousands of your descendants in the future. And it didn't seem like a very good deal to those men at the time, and so they wisely turned it down. And I guess my time is about up. And those are some of the reasons why I think Lincoln does not deserve the reputation as a man of freedom. And by the way, all the other countries that ended slavery in the 19th century did so peacefully. Britain, Spain, Dutch, the French, the Danes, they all find a way to end slavery peacefully. The New Englanders, even New Yorkers. Thank you.